Please be seated. Thank you, Professor Hayward. Mr. Futrell.
No, please, the Commission. Professor Hayward, I had an opportunity to consider some documents over the luncheon adjournment. I understand you may have got them as early as they could have been. Have you had a chance to read them?
Bits.
Okay. Could I ask you to turn to the document? You should have an extract, a hard copy extract. In the top right-hand corner, it will have GWC 0002 0016 0001 and then an underscore 0337. It's headed Agenda Item 8.2.
Mm-hmm.
And I draw your attention to the first box, which is recommendation, and the first two major paragraphs under the heading background.
Yes.
Now, having read that, does that assist to refresh your memory at all regarding the circumstances in which the regulations came to be changed in 2010?
Vaguely.
Okay. Can I ask you, is it your recollection here today, that the genesis for the change came from a request from the licensee?
That's what the paper indicates.
And is that your recollection of what the process was?
I have a vague recollection of this without the specifics.
Okay. Can I ask you to move through the paper to page 9, the major page 9 of the actual paper itself? There's a heading, approval process.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could draw your attention to everything that appears under that heading on that page and the following page, and ask you whether that has assisted you at all to refresh your memory about the process in place before the changes in 2010.
Yes, once again, my recollection is vague.
Vague, is it a bit better than it was earlier today, or not?
I can read what's in the paper and answer accordingly, but how much that aligns with my actual memory would need a different kind of test.
Okay. All right. So can I just draw your attention then to under the heading conclusion?
Yes.
Now, I think I may have asked you some questions earlier today about this, and you read that paragraph. I think largely what you've said reflects what's in that paragraph, but I have some other questions to ask you about that.
Yes.
So you'll see there that it refers to the objectives of the junket approval process to prevent criminal involvement in the lucrative junket market can be accomplished without the requirements for formal approval. There's a reference to the Border Security, Department of Immigration as part of that, which I think you gave some evidence earlier today about that.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a reference there to, in addition, under section 26(2) of the Casino Control Act, the police have authority to prohibit individuals from entering and remaining in licensed casinos. Do you have a recollection now whether that has had influence on your decision making at the time?
I don't know about that specifically, but certainly I had an impression that police had a particular role to play.
Okay. Was it your understanding that they could issue prohibition notices under the Casino Control Act to prevent people from entering into the casino?
Once again, I wouldn't state categorically.
All right. Now, could just draw your attention to the last sentence there, which is the Commission can promulgate regulations. Do you have any recollection of whether it was influencing your decision making at the time that the ability to continue to regulate was available to the GWC?
I think that's always a good thing, but I couldn't say to you how much that was in my thinking or not at the time of this decision making.
Okay, and likewise, the power to give directions, is that something that you considered to be available to the GWC?
Same thing. I think it's good that the ability is there. I couldn't say to you the degree or not that it was in my thinking at the time.
Okay, now, are you aware, do you recall at all, at any time during the period that you were a member of the GWC, of an instance where you were informed of the Western Australian Police exercising power to prohibit someone from entering the casino?
I know that WA Police were involved in a number of matters that did come before the GWC. But once again, I wouldn't like to say definitively that it was in regard to this.
Right. To your recollection, did any of those involve junket operators or junket representatives?
Once again, I couldn't say definitively.
Okay. And now, are you aware, or again, in the time you remember, of whether the GWC issued any directions to Perth Casino relating to junket operations after the changes to the regulations in 2010?
I don't recall.
I think a little earlier, in answer to one of my questions, you said you had, and I'm going to paraphrase you, it might quite right what you said, that you had a recollection or a vague recollection of there being some remaining or residual regulation associated with junkets in the current regulatory framework.
Is there an ability for someone to read back?
Well, no. I'll ask you the question again. I'll put the proposition to you again, which is, are you aware, and this is at the time, I think I put the question to you earlier, at the time that you resigned from or left as a member of the GWC, of any remaining or existing regulatory structure the GWC has in place to deal with junket operations?
I don't recall. I should clarify though, for my term expired rather than having resigned.
Sorry.
So just for clarity.
So it expired and you didn't seek renewal, or you weren't renewed?
Wasn't able to be renewed.
Right.
The state government has a standard around the length of time that any person can sit on any of its boards, and I had already exceeded that.
I see. So I understand. So can you explain or provide your understanding then of, after the decision was made to change the regulations in 2010, what was your understanding of whether or not the GWC would remain or continue to have any role in the regulation of junkets on an ongoing basis?
Do I remember whether we had a role, or do I remember whether we exercised that role?
Do you remember whether you had a role?
For the regulation of junkets, no, I don't remember.
Was your understanding?
Didn't hear that answer.
I'm sorry, no, I don't remember.
Whether you had a role.
Yes.
Whether the GWC had a role.
Yes.
Thank you.
More particularly, do you remember if the possibility of a continuing role had any influence on your decision making in 2010?
I don't remember if that was a consideration or the extent to which it was.
Do you consider, or did you consider at the time you left the GWC, that the GWC should have a continuing role in the regulation of junkets?
I think I, like many in society, welcomed this process in terms of making a whole range of clarifications.
But I'm actually referring to what your state of mind was when you were effectively the last day you're on the board. Did you consider at that time that the GWC should have had a role to play in the regulation of junkets?
The consideration was much more around, should the GWC call for an inquiry? What's the process for doing that? What kind of notice could be taken of findings coming out of some of the hearings in Victoria and New South Wales? It was so in lots of ways the consideration was almost a higher level than the specifics of authorising junket operators or not.
Okay, can I put the question to you slightly different question to you? If I put it to you another way, which is, were you satisfied by the assurances you were given regarding Department of Immigration checks on entries into the country and the obligations on Perth Casino to fulfil its obligations under the AUSTRAC legislation, the AML legislation?
Mm-hmm.
There was no need for the GWC to remain involved in regulation of junkets in Western Australia?
I think we were concerned, the GWC was concerned that the regulation of junket operators be carried out properly.
By whom? By what organisation?
In my mind, on the question of whether or not there was a possibility of money laundering, in my mind that was much more about AUSTRAC than the GWC or the department.
And in that context, is your earlier answer earlier today that you considered that if they were doing their job properly, that was covered? You had faith in them to do their job correctly?
If they were doing their job well.
Another document you should have...
Could I just clarify one thing? You made a distinction between... Yes. You asked for clarification. Are you asking whether I thought the GWC had a role or whether we exercised the role? You remember you seeking that distinction? Can I focus on the second?
Yes.
And ask you this. As you sit here now and post 2010, so in 2015, 2016, any time around there, do you have any recollection of any information being given to the Gaming and Wagering Commission about junket operations?
I'd be guessing. I think there was, but I wouldn't be able to recall the specifics.
Even the type of information?
No, once again, I'd be guessing.
Well, let me just just give you a couple of examples to see if it helps.
Yep.
Anything about the revenue figures that might be attributable to international business as opposed to local business? In other words, dollars. If you can't remember.
Yeah. It rings a bell, but I couldn't answer specifically.
And anything about, for example, say, the number of junket parties who have come in any particular period?
Once again, that sounds specific, that sounds likely, but I couldn't respond specifically. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Mr. Petrel?
Thank you. And just to follow up, what about, were you receiving any information from any other regulatory bodies, casino regulators in Australia, about any probity checks they were undertaking on junket operators in their jurisdictions?
Only in terms of advice that came to the GWC from representatives of the department. So the department here, the office of the department here, would be in contact with officers of the department in a different jurisdiction and would update us generally verbally.
And in that context, do you know of any checks being undertaken to see if, for example, operator A was prohibited in, say, for example, Victoria, but operating in Western Australia, to see that there was consistency across jurisdictions?
I think there were certainly attempts at an alignment. I know we had conversations over a period of time about proposed involvement of a Mr. Ho, and I don't know that was in WA as much as in other jurisdictions, but that was something that certainly came into our agenda here. Now that aligned with those other jurisdictions.
Is that a reference to the Melco transaction? Does that ring a bell? Don't know. Can I ask you, just to move to a different topic now, which is the events. You recall before lunch I asked you some questions and you gave some answers about a change in the way in which the inspections and audits were undertaken at the Perth Casino.
Yep.
And you should have had an opportunity over lunch to consider a paper that was prepared by the Deputy Director General of the Department in August 2015, which is GWC .0002, .0016, .0155 at page 17, which is _0017. It's agenda item 6.2.
Yep.
Now, I'd like you to draw your attention first to the major box under recommendation. And the first paragraph makes a reference to attachment 1. Now, you can take it from me, the minutes record that you were not at the meeting in June 2015. But if I could ask you just to turn to the attachment 1, which starts on page _0022, and it's headed attachment 1, Casino Compliance Strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any recollection now of having considered this document around the time of the meeting in August 2015?
The fact of the various diagrams, because we didn't usually get diagrams in our papers, makes me think that this should be familiar. But once again, I wouldn't like to be drawn on any specific item.
All right. So if I just take that diagram just as an example, you see at the very top, it's got a box that headed Strategic Plan 2015 to 2018.
Yes.
A little earlier in the day, I asked you some questions about the existence of a strategic plan, and you said there wasn't one, or you didn't recall there being one. Is that a reference to a strategic plan of the GWC or some other organisation?
My comments were about being unfamiliar with the GWC having a strategic plan. this looks like it's the strategic plan of the department.
I see. So when one reads the words casino compliance strategy, was it your understanding it was a strategy of the GWC or the department?
The department.
And was it your understanding that you were approving the department strategy or your own strategy?
I don't recall the GWC having a strategic plan.
No, sorry.
I also don't recall any strategic plan from the department coming to the GWC for approval.
Sorry, I think we might be at cross purposes. I'm referring here to the document headed Casino Compliance Strategy.
Okay,
It's
what
on
page are
page
you on?
Last digits are _0022, attachment
Oh,
1.
okay. Yep, sorry, go on.
I asked the question again. I think you may not have understood the question. Was it your understanding that this casino compliance strategy was that of GWC?
I'm reading the first sentence, which says that it was so, but I don't have that recollection.
Okay. Can I just leave that page and take you to another part of it?
Yep.
Now, you might recall earlier today I asked you some questions about whether or not there was any aspect of this that was driven by budgetary considerations.
Mm-hmm.
Can I draw your attention to page _0019 and the 2 paragraphs at the beginning of that page? Now, earlier today, I think the evidence was dealing essentially with the first of those paragraphs, and I asked you the question about the budgetary constraints because of the second paragraph on that page. And I think in answer to one of the questions I said, you didn't think, you said something words to the effect that it wasn't a consideration, that the budgetary constraints were not a consideration in the decision to approve the changes in the way that the inspectors or audits were undertaken. Did you continue to, does that continue with your evidence, having considered the...
Yeah, I don't recall considering that at all, and I know that I have the mindset of, well, I appreciate that departments have finite budgets. It's up to them to manage it. So if they're taxed in one particular area or stretched in one particular area, it's up to them to manage that. It's not up to the GWC to manage that aspect of the department's operations.
The department was supplying inspectors and other people to the GWC to perform some of the functions of the GWC.
Mm-hmm.
If there were budgetary constraints on the ability of the department to perform those functions, was it not a matter of interest to you as a member of the GWC?
Oh, it could well be, but it's up to the department to manage the department's budget.
So do you consider, by your answer, are you considering essentially the GWC budget was part of the department's budget?
Yeah.
So you're not really just drawing any distinction between funds available to the department and funds available to the GWC?
Oh no, I'm absolutely drawing a distinction. The GWC also had a finite budget.
I see. The GWC, its budget was prepared for it by the CFO of the department,
Yes.
it was approved by the GWC.
Yes,
The revenue for the budget came from what sources, to your recollection?
from the department.
From the department, and the expenses that were incurred on behalf of the GWC were incurred by who, on your understanding?
They were covered in the budget,
So who, in other words, who paid?
the department.
Just to try and summarise some of the evidence you've given,
Yes.
again, you can disagree with this, but is it, to reconcile those things, would it be fair to say your view in 2015 was, if you could create the efficiencies you described in the way in which the casino was being inspected and audited without having an impact on the oversight, and if it had a budgetary advantage to it, then it was something you were in favour of?
Yes.
Okay, can I leave matters of finance now and move to another topic? I take it that you are aware or became aware of an ABC program, the Four Corners program that was aired in 2014, entitled High Rollers, High Risk, Australian Casinos and the Threat Posed by Organised Crime.
I recall that there was an ABC show. I didn't see it.
You didn't view it at the time.
No.
Do you recall if it became the subject of some discussion at GWC meetings?
I think it did.
And do you recall being raised around the time of the airing of the article in a GWC meeting?
Yeah, sorry, what was the question?
Do you recall it being raised around the time the article was aired on the ABC at a meeting of the GWC?
There was GWC discussion, yes.
And do you remember what, if anything, was the result of that discussion? Was any action to be taken?
I don't recall.
Can I ask you to have a look at, I'll call up document GWC 0002 0016.0121. I think I may have the wrong reference, I'm sorry. My apologies, I've got the wrong reference. It's 160135 underscore 0003. I'm just going to point some things out to you so that I'm not asking you to remember these events, but just this to put the question I want to ask you in context.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to page, if you go to 0_0008, heading General Business. Reference there to it having been raised at that meeting. I'm not asking you to remember that, but towards the bottom there's a a thing, the Deputy Chairman advised that he would prepare an information paper in relation to junket operators at Crown Perth for the October meeting. Then if I could take you to the agenda papers for the December meeting, which is 0002 0016 0121 at underscore I think it's 053 0053. There's an item there of a report from the Deputy Director General entitled International Commission Business Crown Perth. Do you have any recollection of reading the paper around the time it was prepared? Any discussion at the meeting in December 2014?
If I was there, I would have, taken part in the conversation, but I can't recall.
Do you recall whether there was any discussion or concern at the meeting about carrying out any investigations into links between junket operators in Macau with connections to organised crime and operators of casinos in Australia, including Crown Perth? In other words, was there any consideration given to whether it was something that the GWC should investigate, the veracity of the allegations in some of the allegations in the ABC report?
I don't remember.
You don't remember at all? Positively don't remember, or one of those, it could have happened, it could not have happened?
Yeah, I don't remember.
As you sit here today, is it something you think that the GWC should have taken an interest in?
Oh, an interest, absolutely. An involvement is a different matter.
As in taking some steps to investigate the veracity of the allegations, I mean.
So once again, my response is almost hypothetical because I didn't watch the program. I'm refamiliarising myself with this paper now. We're 7 years on. What I imagine would have been a question in my mind was whether or not the department had sufficient resources and authority to be able to investigate.
Well, the department had a power to give directions, didn't it?
I think that was the GWC's power.
Sorry, well, yeah, the GWC had power.
Not delegated.
Was your understanding that the GWC had no power to investigate?
Well, the GWC wouldn't have investigated
Why do you say that?
because we're a group of individuals sitting as a committee once a month.
Would you not be able to make a request that the department carry it out?
Oh,
on your
well,
behalf?
that's why I said that I don't know that the department would have had the resources, but more the authority to be able to do that. That would have been one of my questions.
You could have sought advice about that from the State Solicitor's Office.
Potentially.
Professor Hayward, had you read the Act, the Casino Control Act, and seen what the powers of the GWC were?
Yeah, not for a long time, to be honest. I mean, sorry if I may, one of the things that occurs to me through this, just this process for me today, and I'm sure for you, is what improvements can be put in place all the way through. And just from today's, I'm looking and thinking, gee, that direction from, for instance, the Public Sector Commission should have been in the first meeting each year, every year, regardless of what change and regardless of when it came in. Now, that's an improvement that's ongoing. Similarly, there I think could and potentially should have been a revision in terms of the provisions of the Act each year, then regardless of who's changing, but there wasn't. Yeah.
Thank you, thank you.
Professor Hayward, you should understand I'm not intimating in any way any criticism of you personally in this. I'm just seeking to understand what was taking place at GWC meetings at the relevant time, and I know that we can look at this through hindsight with a different lens. So they're not. I'm not intending any criticism of you at all. Can I ask you? There were some other events relating to the parent company of the local licensee, Crown Perth, in 2016. If I make reference to the China arrests, will you know what I'm referring to?
Yes.
Okay, so again, I just want to take you to some documents to put you into a reasonable context for what information was before the GWC at the time. So if I could call up GWC .0002, .0016, .0194 underscore 0004. This is part of a minute of a meeting of the GWC held on the 25th of October 2016, and under item 12 general business there was a reference there to the Chair advising he's unable to provide any information regarding the detention of Crown employees in China. Then a little further on in the timeline there, if we call up GWC .0002, .0016, .0210 underscore 0004, minutes of the meeting on the 25th of July 2017. And there's a reference there to, again, advice about what was taking place in China, and that Mr. Joshua Preston, the Chief Legal Officer, would be invited at the following meeting to give a presentation to members on the matter. Then, if I could ask you to cast your mind back to August 2017. Do you recall a meeting at which a presentation was given about the China arrests?
I think we had more than that one.
And do you recall a presentation at one of those meetings by Joshua Preston of representing Crown?
That makes sense. I think at one stage Mr. Barry Felstead would have also attended.
And was the information, to your recollection, that you were provided that a number of current and former employees had been first detained and then convicted of offences under the criminal law of the Republic of China?
That's my understanding.
Now, was there any discussion, and not suggesting when Mr. Preston was present, but at other times, regarding the what we might call the circumstances within Crown organisation as a whole, the Crown Group, that led to the arrest and conviction of its employees of charges against Chinese law?
Can you ask that again?
Yeah, I will. Sorry, it was a terrible question. Was there any more generally, was there any concern expressed about the fact of these arrests taking place and the conviction of Crown employees of crimes against the laws of a foreign country?
So was the GWC concerned
Yes.
that was happening? Yes.
And was there any consideration given to the possibility that the Crown Resorts, as the parent of the licensee of the Perth casino, may not have been operating lawfully in China, or may have encouraged its employees to break the law in that part of the world?
I think logic would say that would be a live question.
Was it a question that occurred to you at the time?
I think it did.
And what then, did you express that to the other members of the GWC at the time?
My recollection is that not just me, that was part of the conversation. How do we know? There is no way that we could know.
Could know what?
If casino operators in China were operating legally in China, there's no way that the GWC here in Perth could know that.
No, but the fact of the convictions you've been made aware of that.
Yes.
And
That puts a lot of currency, I guess, in the laws of a foreign nation, and one with which I'm not at all familiar, so unable to judge.
yes, but from the perspective of the remember the parent that owns and operates the Perth casino, was there any consideration given to the governance of that organisation that may have led to a circumstance where its employees were convicted or exposed to the risk of conviction in China?
I can't recall if we discussed the question of, did Crown here direct its employees in China to act in a way that brought them into contact with the law in China? Is that what you're asking?
Not necessarily direct, but whether they had in place risk management systems that would have prevented them from being exposed to those risks in the first place.
My recollection is that the conversations were much more around the veracity, I guess, of Chinese law.
To your knowledge, did the GWC call for any explanation of formally call for an explanation of the circumstances that led to the conviction of these employees in China?
My recollection is that we were updated as there was any progress being made.
Did you turn your mind at all to the suitability of the parent company of Perth, Crown Perth, in those circumstances?
I don't recall that being a consideration.
So do you remember if any steps were taken after you had the presentation from Mr. Preston by GWC?
Requesting further information as it
Yes.
came to hand.
I see. And do you know what came of that process?
Once again, I don't know whether my memory is of matters in the meetings or matters in the media.
Okay. But do you recall where that particular process ended? You said that you were requesting...
Didn't they get imprisoned?
No, I mean following up with Crown Perth as to information from it about the circumstances which led to the conviction of its employees. Were any steps taken by GWC to follow up that inquiry?
From the perspective of?
The GWC taking an interest in how...
I don't believe that at that time we asked Crown if they were a good parent. Is that what you're asking?
Shortly, yes. Or an explanation of the circumstances that led to its employees being exposed to those risks.
Well, we asked that each time there was a report.
Who did you ask?
Anyone who was presenting.
So these were the questions that were asked of Mr. Preston, are they, at the meeting in August 2017?
Mr. Preston was one who presented, so yes, there would certainly have been questions asked of him. We wanted to know the circumstances.
I see. Could I ask you, again, to put some more questions into the context? We've shown GWC.0002, .0016, .0214 _0002, which is a agenda item for a meeting on the in October 2017. Item 6.3, allegations against Crown Melbourne, and it makes reference to some allegations Mr. Andrew Wilkie MP tabled in the Federal Parliament. Do you have a recollection of those events?
Yes.
And do you understand those allegations to have involved essentially four things: tampering with machines, manipulating return to players, avoidance of AUSTRAC reporting obligations, and encouraging continued gambling by problem gamblers? Those were essentially the four headings. Do you remember that?
Well, they're here.
Yes, I'm asking if you remember it or first.
Mostly I remember the public outcry engendered by Mr. Wilkie, and the fact that the Crown in Melbourne was being investigated.
Was it of concern to you that allegations were made concerning the avoidance of AUSTRAC reporting obligations, for example, given the reliance on AUSTRAC as essentially a defence against?
I think the GWC discussed each of those 4 dot points.
Okay, and what action, if any, did the GWC determine to take in respect of those allegations?
That I can't recall.
Can I ask you to have please show the witness, my electronics are slightly malfunctioning, I'm sorry. So these are the minutes of the meeting, at GWC.0002, .0016, .0217 _0002. And the following page, the top of the following page is a resolution for the department to conduct further inquiries. Do you remember that process at all?
I remember Mr. Wilkie being very public about his calls for inquiries into the casino specifically and in regard to gambling generally.
And do you recall resolving that the department should conduct further inquiries into that matter on behalf of the GWC?
My recollection is that we discussed each of those 4 dot points.
Is your recollection today that you requested someone to carry out an investigation into those matters?
No, that's what I've said. I remember the discussion.
Yep.
I don't remember the action taken on the discussion.
Okay. Do you have any reason to doubt that the resolution there recorded is correct?
To note the report.
To note, and that the department will conduct further inquiries into this matter?
I don't see why that would be recorded if it wasn't the case.
Okay. Do you have any, and I'm going to go back to this, I'm sorry, but do you have any recollection of what was the nature of the inquiries that you're expecting to be undertaken.
No.
All right. Can I take the witness to GWC .0002, .0016, .0216 underscore 0055, which is an agenda item for a meeting in November 2017, item 6.6, update allegations against Crown Melbourne. Do you recall receiving that agenda item paper and reading it at the time?
I'm imagining so.
So you don't remember it? You don't remember what the paper was about?
I remember what the paper was about.
And do you recall that the paper largely dealt with the question of tampering of machines and the manipulating returns, and it addressed those concerns that Mr. Wilkie had expressed in his allegations in federal parliament?
As I've indicated, I know that all 4 dot points were discussed. I can't remember what action specifically arose from that. If it was limited to 2 of the dot points, then it was limited to 2 of the dot points, but I don't recall that.
All right. Do you have any recollection of considering the question of whether there should be some further investigation made into the allegation concerning avoidance of AUSTRAC reporting obligations, for instance?
I thought that's what this paper was.
Well, the paper...
It says the report included an undertaking for the department to conduct further inquiries at Crown Perth and the Commission resolved, blah, blah, blah. I'm expecting the rest of this paper, which I can't see yet, talked about what that was.
Well,
Does it not?
Please take the time to read it. So you can read the first page, 0055.
No, we're only looking at the top of it.
Beg your pardon?
Well,
That's
I
all
think
that
Ms.
we can
Hayward was
see.
saying she can't see all of the document.
Yes, I know. I was going to get to looking at the second page. Oh, I see. Right. Very well. That's better.
Yes.
So is your understanding that you had an expectation that all 4 dot points would be dealt with?
No, that's what I'm saying. We discussed all 4.
Okay.
I can't remember the actions ascribed to them coming out. And it kind of won't matter how many times you ask me that. I don't recall.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you again.
Of course.
Do you remember anything arising out of these allegations that led to further inquiries being made into the bullet point concerning avoidance of AUSTRAC obligations and the bullet point concerning encouraging continuing gambling by problem gamblers?
Answer's the same. Sorry. Look, we did consider these things, of course, unrelated to this particular matter. So, responsible service of gambling and the issue of problem gamblers, for instance, was an issue more broadly considered than only related to allegations against Crown in Melbourne. I couldn't tell you whether anything that came from that I do recall was related to this or that more general consideration, for instance? I'm sorry, I can't differentiate between the two.
Are you, do you have a recollection of the GWC receiving reports prepared by the regulator in Victoria?
All of our papers came via the department here.
But do you have a recollection of receiving a report prepared by the Victorian regulator into essentially a review of the suitability of Crown Melbourne to be the licensee in Melbourne?
If it was included, it would have been an appendix, I imagine.
But you don't have a recollection of...
Only the WA department would have presented papers to the GWC here.
Yes, if I just take you to GWC .0002, .0016, .0239_0277, which is a agenda item for a meeting in August 2018, agenda item 11.4, Crown Melbourne, 6th review of the casino operator's licence. Doesn't have this one? Oh, really? Do you have a recollection now of receiving any papers before concerning that?
Okay, so not by them. I'm sorry, but I'm interpreting things really literally here.
Yeah.
This is not a paper by the Victorian regulator.
Yes.
Kelly Pemberton is an officer of the department here in WA.
Yes.
So she has collated material and put it into a report for the GWC here. This is not the Victorian regulator reporting to us.
I understand that. So maybe the way I asked the question was confusing. What I was trying to ask you is whether you had any recollection of receiving a copy of that report and reviewing its recommendations and findings as a member of the GWC.
I don't think that I read it. I can see there that there's mention of a link.
Yes, it may not have been in the pack. I don't know, but it appears on just for clarity, in case you can recall reading it, at page _0288. The report proper starts there, and it's headed 6th review of the casino operator and licence, June 2018.
Yeah, I don't remember reading it, to be honest.
Do you have any recollection of any discussion at any meetings of the GWC concerning the Victorian regulator's review of Crown Melbourne and any implications it had for Crown Perth?
Can we go back to the previous paper? Does that do it?
I don't believe you were at the meeting when that paper was tabled, but I'm talking about any other meetings that you attended.
Whatever was happening with Crown in Victoria, Crown in Melbourne, was always a matter of concern for the GWC here. So if matters arose there, well, we understood that the context and lots of the mechanics were different here, it still was a point of conversation.
Okay. Now, if we fast forward a year from June 2018, when that paper was put in the board papers, to around the middle of 2019.
Yep.
By then there had been a number of, So you recall there being a number of allegations made in media publications concerning Crown Resorts Limited and its subsidiaries.
I think media does that consistently.
Yes, but do you recall around this time that the Bergen inquiry was established in New South Wales?
Yep.
In around August 2019, and there had been some media allegations around that time. You remember those?
I remember that there were media allegations. I don't actually have a lot of trust in the media and the way they report.
No, I understand that might be a position taken, but there was a deluge of articles around this time. Do you have a recollection of a presentation being given to the GWC by representatives of Crown concerning the Junket processes and some of the media allegations at the time?
If there was any issue that was, I suppose, topical at the time, we always asked for a report.
Do you remember a presentation being given to you from a representative of Crown about the allegations that have been aired in the media and Junkets in particular?
I think there was.
Do you remember that taking place or not?
More likely yes than no.
Do you have a clear recollection of it having taken place?
Clearly not.
During the period that you were a member of the GWC and after the Bergen inquiry had commenced, were any steps taken by the GWC to conduct an independent investigation or inquiry into some of the allegations that had been made?
An inquiry into Crown Perth
Request for information?
based on what was happening in New South Wales.
Yes, the allegations in the media and the reasons for the commencement of the Bergen inquiry.
The GWC liked to be kept informed of anything that was going on, either with that inquiry or anything in Melbourne. Lots of the position adopted by the GWC was a wait and see response.
And by wait and see, do you mean wait and see what the outcome of
Yes.
the other investigations were
Yes.
before taking any regulatory steps yourself, or
Or before knowing what steps would even be appropriate.
and was consideration given to the reasons for I'm not being critical, but adopting the wait and see approach? Was there any consideration of why that was preferable to another approach?
WA is a different context to gambling in the other jurisdictions. So our context is different. If something happens in a different context, it doesn't automatically mean that it applies here in our context.
Can you explain that a little more? What do you mean by gambling in Western Australia is in a different
Well, we
context?
don't have pokies, on every corner, essentially.
Yes, but speaking of regulation of casinos in particular, is there any differences you perceive between the context in Western Australia and in other states in Australia for casino regulation?
Once again, I'm trying to, as I wane here, I'm trying to not let my tiredness obscure what you might actually be asking. But if something is happening in another state, it doesn't automatically mean that it's happening in this state. So running off and instigating a whole lot of reviews based on something that's happening in a different jurisdiction doesn't necessarily equate.
So was it a concern that you didn't want to duplicate what was being done elsewhere, primarily? Is that what you mean by that?
Well, if there was an investigation, for instance, in how a casino was operating in New South Wales, that particular inquiry found to be fully investigated but nothing to see here, I'm not sure why we would run off and instigate an investigation into that same thing when New South Wales, in that case, found there was nothing to see.
Yes.
Mr. Futrell, Professor Haywood, would you like us to take a short break? I'm quite happy to take 5 minutes or so just to give you a breather.
Yeah, five might be good.
Good.
I'm not sure how much it'll help, but it won't be a bad thing.
We'll just take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
And will we get to Mr. Duckworth today? do you
We
think?
will not get to Mr. Duckworth today.
Can you get a message to Mr. Duckworth? 5 minutes.
rise.
Thank you. Please sit down. Thank you, Professor Hayward and Mr. Futrell.
May it please the Commission, as Professor Hayward, you'll be pleased to know there's only a couple of topics to go.
Topics or questions?
Topics, more than two questions.
Okay.
And I do appreciate it's getting late in the day and you've been sitting there for some time. I would like to ask you if you have a recollection that during 2017 there was a review conducted of all gambling and liquor compliance activities performed by the department to assess the effectiveness of programs and practices employed at that time. Do you recall that process taking place?
So that was an internal departmental process, was it?
It was a departmental process and it also involved the GWC. Can I ask, this may help you, GWC .0002.0016.0202 underscore 0013 agenda item 5.2 of a meeting in February 2017. The author is the Director General, and so it's an information paper about a process that the department was undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Could I draw your attention to the first paragraph? Which I just paraphrased, and then can I draw your attention towards the bottom of the page is a reference to a report released by the Victorian Office of Auditor General titled Regulating Gambling and Liquor. It's an attachment to the paper and it highlighted a range of issues for the Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation, which I've been referring to as the Victorian Regulator.
Mm-hmm.
And it highlighted some shortcomings, one of which was that the VCGLR have not paid sufficient attention to areas of risk in the casino's operations, such as the detection of people excluded by Victoria Police responsible for gambling and money laundering, as an example. And then the author goes on to say something about his view that it's somewhat unfair. But in any event, do you have a recollection of reading through this paper in the early part of 2017, understanding there was a review being undertaken of compliance within the department that affected the GWC?
I'm reading that it happened.
Do you remember it happening?
Not particularly. I mean, I remember that there was a review. I don't recall with clarity this paper.
With respect to the review, do you have a recollection of what aspects of the GWC's regulatory functions were reviewed, if any?
No.
So, when you, the GWC, became aware there was a review being undertaken, to your recollection, was there any consideration given to whether the GWC would want to be involved in shaping the review of its functions?
I don't recall that coming to the GWC.
So was it a case of there being activities or the compliance system reviewed by the department and you receiving reports on how that review was undertaken?
That's my understanding.
Do you have a recollection about the reading or understanding some of the the shortcomings of the Victorian regulator, and whether that caused you to have any pause about whether Western Australia was being regulated adequately?
In the context of that previous paper that was shown?
Yes. in the context of this particular event, the reason that the Director General was asked to do this task, to conduct a review.
So this has got nothing to do with anything that's happened in Victoria that we've already considered. Is that what you're saying?
It's a reference to the report attached to this agenda.
So that was the blue cover that was up before?
No.
Right,
I
okay.
ask you to look at this one. It's at page _0015. Regulating gambling and liquor, Victorian Auditor General's report. Do you remember reading through this report at all?
Not in detail.
Do you remember having it drawn to your attention at all that that one aspect of that report was to identify some shortcomings with the regulator in Victoria concerning money laundering?
Have you got a time frame?
Yes, at
I mean-
the time of this meeting and during the review in 2017.
Okay, and how does it compare with the blue cover?
Blue cover came later. Blue cover was a review of the Crown Melbourne's licence by the regulator.
That was June
In
2018.
2008. 18, sorry.
Okay, so this is before that.
Correct.
And your question?
My question is whether you have a recollection of it having been drawn to your attention that the Victorian Office of Auditor General had reached conclusions about shortcomings in the Victorian regulator.
Okay, and the paper for which this was an attachment, could we go back to that?
Yes, it's at page _0013.
Well, it says there in that second last paragraph.
Yes, but I'm asking you whether you can remember now.
I don't recall reading that report in detail.
Right. Do you recall any discussion about the Victorian Auditor General's report at GWC meetings at all?
Anything that happened with regard to Crown in Melbourne or Sydney was a consideration for the GWC here.
But do you remember discussing this particular report at all?
Sorry, at this point in the day, I'm hard pressed to recall anything. I couldn't tell you what I had for lunch.
Okay.
Well, I could actually, and it was very nice, but
I understand.
Mr. Future, what are the remaining subject headings which you want to go?
The remaining subject is delegations, and that's the last one.
All right, thank you.
And I think we'll leave some time for some further questions by others, so that we should take not too long, I don't think.
I think we're probably more interested in the process here, in the area of delegation. Witnesses' recollection of process.
Yes. Can I, again, it's to assist, I hope, with your recollection. If witness could be shown GWC.0001.00007.0184. Actually, I think I've got hard copies of this, haven't I? I think I prepared hard copies, so there may be an issue with disclosure on one of these documents. Yes. I'll do all these without putting them up on the screen because I don't want to inadvertently reveal something I shouldn't. Now,
I think we can manipulate the screen so that we can see it.
so this is a delegation signed and dated 28 April 2020, so a bit over a year ago. Could you, I infer that the signature, the third from the bottom of the page, is yours?
Yes.
So this was signed. What was your understanding of the powers that were being delegated under that document?
By that, do you mean could I rattle off those 4 acts, chapter and verse?
No.
Because the answer's no.
What sorts of things did you think it was authorising the holder of the delegation to do on behalf of GWC?
Routine matters.
Routine matters such as?
Raffles.
Sorry, what was that answer?
Raffles.
Approving raffles.
Yes. Yep.
What about changes to the casino operations manual?
Once again, I'd need to look at the paper.
Is that something you would consider to be a routine matter, or is it something you would expect to be outside?
For me, a routine matter is things that in the past had previously come to the GWC for resolution. And so there was a pattern, because of almost the regularity, a pattern of approval. So the question for the department as well as the GWC is, to what extent do you want those matters that are routine to keep coming before the GWC so that it can routinely approve, as opposed to the exceptions of things where they're a first off or there's something a little bit different?
And so, on the face of this delegation, that what you've described doesn't emerge from its words. Was there some other way it was recorded? Any limitations on the delegation that you can recall?
Not that I can recall.
So, if I could ask you, and you might be able to explain this because it's only a year ago. This document is GWC 0002 0016.0299. Again, I've got a feeling this one might be problematic. Would it assist if I just provide the commissioners with the hard copy, or are we able to see it?
Yep, see it, thank you.
Thank you.
I think these are the minutes of the meeting at which the
And which item would you like me to consider?
it's item 9.2. Now, I need to ask this question in the context of the other documents. So, this is the agenda. Now, it's a little harder to juggle these electronically. I don't know if it can be done. The agenda item is GWC.0002.0016.029. Underscore 0345. Now, in the case, so that's a paper that came to you describing the instrument of delegation.
Mm-hmm.
Under the if you look at attachment 1 and put that alongside what you actually end up signing, they are different.
So you're saying that page is not the same as that page? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And then if
Okay.
I could just ask you to have a look at the minutes, because I wasn't able to understand this on reading them myself. You might be able to explain this.
Yep.
So if you look at the minutes under item 9.2, there's a resolution not to approve the delegation, and yet there was a delegation signed in different terms to the one that was proposed. Sorry, 9.3 deals with the one that was signed.
Yeah, sorry, so your question?
So, do you recall how it is that you came to refuse to sign a
So
delegation that's
is what you're
specific-
asking why Roman 5 and Roman 6 were not included on that piece of paper? Is that what you're asking?
No.
Okay.
I'm asking why it came to be in a form it did, namely a very short document that does not describe in any detail the delegations of powers, versus this more detailed version in attachment 1 with a number of sub-paragraphs. So what was it? Why was it you refused to sign that, but chose to sign something in a different form?
No, I'd have to sit and work my way through that.
Okay, and so is there any other place that you're aware of where there's a recording that the delegation that was signed was in some way confined to specific topics that you referred to as routine matters?
There were particular matters that required each member of the GWC to sign. Have you got a copy of all those other ones?
I don't know that I understand what you're referring to. Are you talking about other delegations to specific
Yeah.
individuals? All right. Well, I don't have those in front of me, so
Because I think that's part of this story.
Okay, so do I understand what you said correctly? There should be a series of other delegations to other people of specific, what you describe as routine matters.
Yes.
And your understanding is that overall delegation deals with all those other matters as well?
I'd have to have a look at that whole
Right.
story. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Mr Dharmananda?
No, nothing arising, thank you.
Ms Seward?
No questions, thank you.
Mr Ryan?
No questions, thank you, Commissioner.
And Lindy, do you have anything?
I just have a few questions for you, Professor Hayward.
Yes.
Pardon me for not knowing the exact chronology, but were you present at the meeting where Mr Connolly declared a friendship with Mr Murray?
I don't know who Mr Murray is, so
Claude Murray?
don't know
You
who
don't
that
have
is.
any recollection of that?
No.
And you don't, so do you have a recollection of subsequently hearing that Mr Connolly had a friendship with a Crown employee who was in the legal and compliance?
Only
Department of Crown?
when that hit the papers earlier this year.
Right. But you have no recollection, whilst you were a GWC member, of being advised of that formally?
I don't recall it, no.
So do you have any recollection of being advised whilst you're a GWC member that he had friendships with other Crown employees, John Nichols and Paul Hume?
No, and I don't recall those names either.
You may have answered this question to Mr Futrell, but I just want to make sure that I've covered it off
Yes.
to find out your opinion on this issue. Do you think that departmental officers who are performing duties on behalf of the GWC should disclose to GWC conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest that they might have?
I think they should definitely declare within the department. I think declaration to the GWC is an improvement that could come from this process here.
Next, I want to move on to a topic of money, finances.
Yeah.
Now, you said in answer to a question that I think the GWC's money came from the department or something to that effect.
That's my understanding.
Right, so that's what I wanted to explore with you. Did you appreciate that, for example, casino licence fees are under the Casino Control Act to be paid to the GWC?
That does sound familiar, although I don't know that. Oh, no, they might have been in our financial statements. Once again, I'd have to I'd have to cross-check the financial statements that came to us monthly.
So without having a look at those, what is your understanding as to how the GWC paid for the services it received from the department, if at all?
I don't think that it did.
In answer to a question from Mr Futrell, I think you said that you did think that the funding for GWC was not adequate at times. Am I right or wrong about that?
I think it was much more a question of whether or not funding for the department was adequate.
So my question is that if you thought that, and if you thought that that was impacting on the ability of GWC to perform its role, did you ever consider putting a submission to the government requesting more funds for the work of GWC?
My understanding is that there was no facility for the GWC to make that sort of submission. The department would do that through normal budget processes.
And do you recall a time where you were advised by departmental officers that they were going to do that on behalf of the GWC?
They didn't generally discuss with us the departmental budget processes.
In relation to the China arrests,
Yes.
I just noted in one of those documents you were shown, it was a report that you received in December of 2014, and Mr Conley, I think, advised the GWC that the Chinese market preference well, there was a Chinese market preference for junkets, and that this was a business strategy in essence of Crown to promote junkets. Was that your understanding at that time?
That sounds right.
And then you hear that Crown employees in China have been arrested. Is that right?
Yep.
Did the GWC then ever discuss how those arrests might jeopardise the Crown's business strategy? In the sense that if it couldn't recruit junket participants from China, then that might affect its bottom line.
That certainly was raised with the GWC.
And in that context, did the GWC think that it might be advantageous to get some independent advice as to whether that might affect the ability of the revenue from the casino to be maintained? That is, state revenue from the casino to be maintained?
I think that was mostly seen as not so much our business, but the business of Crown.
Did you take any note of the part of the board pack which advised you what the outstanding amount of the funds advance facility was?
No,
So
I can't
that
recall.
was, as I understand it, the amount of funds that Crown had advanced to international players which was outstanding?
I don't recall that.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Hayward, I've only got two questions. As I understood your answer to a question that Commissioner Jenkins posed to you, in terms of the disclosure of conflicts of interest, you said that a departmental officer performing functions for the Gaming and Wagering Commission, as things presently stand, should disclose that conflict to the department, but not necessarily to the Gaming and Wagering Commission. Is that what you said?
Oh.
And you went on to say it would be an improvement if they were to disclose. So that's a policy reform.
Yeah, I think it would be an improvement.
All right. Now, in answer to a question from Mr. Futrell on the subject of disclosure of conflicts of interest, and in particular to Mr. Connolly,
Yes.
the note I took of what you said was that you would expect him to disclose to the Gaming and Wagering Commission conflicts, and the words were, if he were part of the decision-making process. Do you remember saying that?
Yes.
Could you just explain to me what you mean by that? And the context, of course, is that you have Mr. Connolly, who is who's got three hats. He's the Deputy Director General Regulation. He's the Deputy Chair of the Gaming and Wagering Commission, and he's the Chief Casino Officer. So what did you mean by that phrase, if he were part of the decision-making process?
In my view, not only related to that specific question, but globally, if someone has a conflict and they take that conflict into how and what the decision coming out of that conversation is, it's a situation of jeopardy, not only for that person, but whoever the decision-making body is. If you've got a conflict, you should absent yourself from the decision-making.
But what actually is the distinction that you draw with someone of Mr. Connolly's, with the position Mr. Connolly holds. When is he in part of the decision-making process and when is he not part of the decision-making process?
I think mostly he chose not to be. He would put things where the GWC raised either a difference with the recommendation, a request for further information, a request for a specific report. He always took it on board. He didn't ever push his own, what I would perceive as his own agenda.
Right, if I can put it a slightly different way, that the distinction is not as to whether he's acting as deputy chair
Yep.
and whether he's acting in one of those other two capacities, but it's again, as you would say, a case-by-case basis as to the depth of his involvement in the process. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
All right, thank you. And my other question comes back to budgets. And you said, again, in an answer to a question from Commissioner Jenkins, you didn't think, or you don't think, that the Gaming and Wagering Commission has the facility to seek additional resources from the government.
That's correct.
I'm reminded a little bit here of Oliver Twist. Please, sir, may I have a little more?
gruel.
You may get the cane by asking, but if you don't ask, you have no chance of getting just a little bit more. What is it about the position of the Gaming and Wagering Commission that leads you to believe that you don't have a Twist like, an Oliver Twist like facility?
It actually refers to my understanding of the budget process in terms of who was allowed to present to the government committee structure in terms of putting forward their budget and their budget request. Sometimes that's from a departmental perspective, just straight up. Sometimes it is where the state government has additional money, but it targets, you can come forward with your bids, but it's got to comply with A, B or C. So there are a couple of different processes, but it's always, in my experience, through the respective department.
But isn't the position here that your chair is the Director General of the department who is charged with the responsibility to support you? So if the GWC, if the members of the Gaming and Wagering Commission were to say to their chair, we believe we need additional funding for processes or projects X, Y and Z, that isn't a facility that could at least get into the budget deliberations, even though they may be unsuccessful?
It could well. It could. It would still go up as a departmental bid.
All right, thank you. Mr. Sadler. I'm sorry, Mr. Futrell, was there anything arising from Commissioner's questions? Mr. Sadler.
Thank you, Commissioners. I just have one question. I think it's slightly obvious, but I think it's probably best recorded on the transcripts. Professor Hayward, could you please describe for the Commission your ability to recall the subjects discussed post this morning's break, including Crown employees in China, the Victorian Casino Regulators report into Crown, and, for example, the Auditor General's report into the Victorian Casino Regulator?
Once again, I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
That's unfortunate.
Must be something about lawyers. Anyway, when I concluded my term with the GWC, I did what I tend to do with anything else when I leave a board or committee, or when I leave a particular employer, and that is rule a line and move on.
Yep.
Of course, there are going to be some bits that stay in your head and stay for a long time, and there'll be a whole lot of other things that don't, because they don't have relevance to the context into which you move.
At the start of today, I asked you if the Commission invited you to address a number of topics
Yes.
provided to you. What matters did you discuss in your witness statement?
All of those questions.
And were any of the subjects discussed post the morning break discussed in your witness statement?
I'd have to have a look, but I don't think so.
That's what
I don't understand that last exchange, I'm sorry. Junkets,
Junkets
were discussed.
But the fact of the
Money
Victorian
laundering was
regulators,
discussed.
money laundering, the Victorian regulator report, the Auditor General's report. I think the purpose of the question was just to record the transcript. These weren't matters discussed in Ms Hayward's report, and we'd understood that matters to this nature would be notified as issues that we would come back to and address as issues for the Commission's benefit.
Well, we may have something to say about that on another occasion, but the purpose of the topics that are given is to assist in the preparation. It's not to canvass all of the material that might be relevant.
I agree.
We can leave it. We can leave it at that. Professor Hayward, thank you very much for your assistance.
Thank you.
Fulfilled your obligations under the summons and your release. Thank you very much.
Thank you
And
very
we'll
much.
adjourn
Good
the-
luck.
Free to put another line.
Yeah,
A double line
roll a line.
underneath your role as TWC member.
I appreciate that. Thank you and good luck.
May I, before you rise, just raise a few matters of housekeeping, so this does need not worry you.
Oh, good.
I just need to formally tender some of the documents, if I could. My apologies, I haven't been keeping track of what other people have tendered, so I don't know if I'm going to tender them again. But the one document is GWC.
What has been happening a little is that we just produce a list towards the end of the day, and by direction of the commissioners, it's included in its entirety in the transcript.
That is convenient
That
to me.
does help in saving a double up of tenders of things that are already exhibits.
If that's acceptable to you, we will just notify you of the tenders, and our parties as well.
Yes, please.
Mate, please.
Now we won't be sitting tomorrow or Friday, and it's not because we're playing golf. It's that our hosts, the WA Industrial Relations Commission, need their facilities. So it's 10 a.m. on Monday. We'll adjourn to 10 a.m. on Monday. Thank you.
All rise.